Hey guys, back again. How are we all? How have you gone with the last couple of videos that really focused on the inner child work? And we did some experiences, we've done 3 all up. The floor work where you talk to that child part, we've done the imagination where we met that child part, we've also done the emotional where we kind of go into the emotional spaces through the body, through sensations. Now, the more you practice them, the better, the easier it gets. So I just really want to ask you a few questions, and that is, how have you got on? Have you noticed any difference? Have you noticed any changes? Have you noticed you feel differently? What has been your experience? Let your experience reveal the truth of whatever has arisen through those exercises. So as you can see, I'm back in the office, back in Adelaide, so back home, which is lovely. It's been lovely to be home again after all that travelling. So I'm going to talk about something that I think comes out of the inner child. I mean, there's so many things we could talk about, but I think what's really important is, as we've done all that work, that we start to talk about how your feelings, your emotions, aren't always fact, but they are your truth. And what I mean by that is, if you feel something, so say I feel anxious, well, that's how I feel. So that is my truth. Whether you like it or not, whether anyone around me likes it or not, I feel anxious. Now, if you're up in your head, you're thinking, well, if you've got a reason to be anxious, maybe you're getting on an airplane, you don't like flying. So that might be the reason that you're anxious, because the mind is saying, I might die, I might fall out of the sky, I might have an accident, might crash, might disappear. And then that's kind of causing that feeling of anxiety. So that feeling is being caused by thinking, by lots of negative thinking about the what ifs. So your feeling is your truth, and no one can take that away from you. They might try and convince you, oh, you're being irrational, you're being illogical, the chances of you dying in a plane are blah blah blah. And people will often rationalize those emotions away because they don't want you to feel the way you do, and so they'll come up with all the rationale, the reasons why. They'll try and fix it, they'll do all sorts of things, but just don't feel anxious. And I think this is the trouble, why people don't actually feel safe. And this is why people don't always express their feelings, because somebody out there will want to go, well, that's stupid, fancy feeling fancy feeling scared, you're not gonna die, so kind of get over it. Or if you're angry, often more than not, people will sort of want you not to be angry. They don't like, we've all been brought up, you see, not to really like feelings, because you were told very early on, you cry, I'll give you something to cry about, and don't you dare be angry with me. And so a lot of our emotions are repress, deny, and avoid. So yes, that's your truth, right? Yes, that's your truth. But feelings aren't all facts. So let's talk about a situation now, give you a better understanding. So I grew up and feeling, was left feeling unimportant, insignificant, blah, 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 feeling unworthy, unlovable. And so as more of an older person, I would walk into a room and I would, notice I say the word feel. We're going to talk about that as well. I would feel, like no one really likes me. So I would feel insecure, not happy, not content. I'd feel worried, or because I'd feel like no one really liked me. So that's my feeling, but it wasn't fact. I didn't know that these people didn't like me. I felt like they didn't like me. And that feeling came from my own body, from myself. And so my feeling was my truth, but it probably wasn't fact that they didn't like me. I didn't know for a fact because your thoughts and feelings come out of you about what, and this is why what you experience early on is paramount. Because what I experience, if I experience family members that didn't really spend a lot of time with me, and I grew up thinking I'm not that important, I'm going to feel that and then project that out onto the world. No, where I go, whether I'm at school or out in the workforce or wherever I am, I might feel that I'm sort of less than, because I didn't really get a lot of attention and no one really said anything positive to me. And so I very much err on the negative and assume that people won't like me, because I've been brought up feeling unliked, and now I don't really like myself. And I go out and I project that out onto the world. And that's why your feelings aren't facts, but they are your truth. And I think people get confused about that, and this is why inner child work is so powerful, because people can tell you what to think. They can mess with your mind, but they can't mess with your truth. So, and this is why people don't feel safe, because they go to someone and go, oh, I feel whatever it is. And people want to try and talk you out of that feeling. And really what they're saying is, no, you don't really feel like that. And it's kind of a form of gaslighting, isn't it? I did it. It was done to me and I did it. And I'll give you an example. My daughter would come home and say, I don't have any friends. And I'd say, of course you do. You've got loads of friends. What about this one and this? And I wasn't really listening to what she was saying. I feel lonely. Really, that's what she was saying. I feel lonely. And instead of saying, oh, it sounds like you feel like, there's no one there for you at school, I went into my head and tried to rationalize it and point out, you have got friends. And that is a subtle form of gaslighting. At its subtlest form. Really, that's what it is. It's like me saying, no, you don't feel that way. Of course you've got friends. And so this is what we do to our kids, to each other all the time. We denounce their emotions. So I'll go in and say, I feel really angry. And then someone will come in and tell me why I shouldn't feel angry. Instead of going, you feel angry? And this is why we have therapists, because we weren't taught that. You see, I had to honor my own feelings of anger. I didn't like them, and I'm trying to work them out. And this is where we go wrong. It's like, I'm trying to work them out. I don't want to feel this way. I struggle, and all I do feels worse, because now I reject myself. I don't like the way I feel. But actually, if I just was able to acknowledge how I feel, actually, I feel angry. Actually, I feel scared. Actually, I feel alone. Actually, I feel vulnerable. Actually, I just feel this way. And no one came in or someone came in and went, wow, you feel really angry. What's going on for you? Sounds like you feel sad. What's happening? Wow, I can see you're really struggling right now. And this is why therapy is very powerful, because hopefully when you go see your therapist, the therapist doesn't say, oh, well, no, really, you shouldn't feel that way. You have no right to feel that way. Or try and convince you, or rationalize your feelings away. And this is what I say, this is your truth, whether you like it or not, and whether they like it or not. And when you start to honor your truth, not buy into it, not believe it, because my feelings of everyone who didn't see, I think sometimes depends what kind of person you are. There are two types, the headies and the hearties. One is top down, one is bottom up. Another form of, maybe you've heard that, where you it's like the mind starts thinking before the emotions come on board, or the emotions are first and then the thinking might come on. And for me, this is what I had to work out, because I was very much a feeler, and when you do, Myers Briggs is a brilliant personality profile, and you'll end up with 4 letters. I am an ENFP, intuitive, feeling, perceiver. Extrovert, ENFP, right? Extrovert, intuitive, feeling, and perception. And that meant I was overdeveloped in my intuitive senses. So I was overdeveloped emotionally, intuitively, and often I would believe this more than I would believe this. So for example, let's take an example. I'd have a client come in and I felt intuitively they didn't want to be there, but they kept rocking up week after week after week. And they actually did the homework. And so I remember talking to my supervisor once saying, I know they don't want to be there. And, my supervisor said, rightly so, but Stella, they keep rocking up every week. So it's like you're relying on your intuitive more than you're relying on what you can see, touch, taste, and smell. And And really, this is why we get like, we don't believe what we see, because I believed what I felt more than I believed what I could see. Because all right, maybe they didn't want to be there, but actually they kept rocking up anyway. And so it's really important that, yes, this is my truth, but it's not always the fact. It's only telling me part of the story. Just like if I just, so for the thinkers and the judges, a lot of people, I've got the T and the J on the end of their 4 letters in their Myers Briggs, and they're the thinkers and the judges. Now that tells you they're much more up here in their head, they're headies. And the headies have overdeveloped this sense of cognitive ability, and part of the journey is to actually strengthen whatever is more a weaker part of you. So for me, it was the head. So I had to learn to think, and actually I probably didn't learn to think well until I went to uni, and I started using my mind to think through concepts and ideas, and have an idea and think about things and judge things and weigh them out. And as soon as I developed my sense perception, which is thinking, hearing, sight, see, taste, smell, I actually was a little bit overdeveloped here, underdeveloped here. Now, we know lots of cognitive people that are very overdeveloped in their thinking and undeveloped in their emotional parts. And I think we all have to develop in the areas that, to bring balance, because this is, if this is out of balance and we're all head and no heart, and all heart and no head, and we've got no logic and no rationale, and we've got no, and this is why people will judge people, say, oh, they're very unempathic. I mean, this is why narcissists lack empathy, lack compassion, because they're like just up here, they're just all up in their head. And so there's this real, you get that really out of balance, and you can get really, quite evil people who just think about need to control and have power over people and get their needs met in a very vampirish way. And so they'll often choose people that are probably overdeveloped here. We can be overdeveloped, over empathic, over compassionate, over emotional. And, people, perhaps when you were brought up, you were called too sensitive, as if it's a bad thing. No, it probably meant you was more of a hearty than a heady. And so it's about realizing that I have this other domain that I have to strengthen, and by what can I see, what can I touch, what can I taste, thinking thoughts through to become more rational and logical. And when these two are more balanced, and that's why I bring up the Myers Briggs, so I didn't know that. I just did it and said, oh, I'm an ENFP, but no one ever actually said, until I did more study around it, that actually it means you are overdeveloped here, underdeveloped there. And if you develop that sense more effectively, you'll actually be a lot more balanced. And that's exactly what happened, because as I my rational brain came in. So I walk in a room, instead of feeling like no one doesn't like me, my rational brain would say, well, these people don't know me, how can they not like me? And as I learned to like myself, obviously I learned to really like and respect me, and realize I am important, I am deserving, and everything's going to be okay. I started to have a relationship with that part of me. Everything changed. And this is why some people are just overthinkers, and they get stuck in their head, and they just, they're going round and round and round. And this is where insanity is, you just keep going round and round and round, because they haven't developed the sense of emotional, strengthened their emotional sense of self. And so this is why we can look very out of balance. And people who are really struggling because they're overdeveloped in either one of those senses. So does that make sense? I'm trying to explain something that I think is actually quite complicated in a very simplistic way, because I actually think it's very simple but very complicated all at the same time, which is, I think, a lot of things. And so this is why the inner child work, I think, is really important if you are more heady. If you are more of a hearty, where you're all emotions, and this totally runs the show, then you have to learn to engage with more cognitive ability. And so often more not, as a therapist, you are looking at whether someone is more proficient. They've learned the language of the mind, which is words, but they haven't really been taught the language of the heart. And I think a lot of us haven't been taught the language of the heart because as a child growing up, what did you hear? What did you see? If you cried and, got upset and angry, you were a lot of the time told to repress, deny and avoid. And so I think it is all the people I've worked with a lot of highly cognitive people, and it is quite difficult for them to learn the language of the heart, which is emotions. And in fact, somebody who's quite emotional, another thing you might call them is a minimizer and a maximizer. So a maximizer will bring the feelings up and out, so they look more aggressive, cry, shout, carry on. It's actually sometimes easier to teach them how to think more effectively, because thinking is very upheld in our society. Feelings not so much. If you're over emotional, you're obviously you are actually looked down on. Oh, they're so emotional, they can't control themselves. Oh, they get so angry, and they just lash out. And so either people are really, really afraid of you, or they might just see you as a pathetic victim. And so I think emotional people tend to get a bit of and especially if you're highly cognitive, you'll actually feel you're superior in some sense. They'll sort of look down their nose at you because you're so emotional, and actually a lot of us will feel, I think, a lot of shame when someone does that, because that's kind of probably what happened as a kid when you were emotional, because when you're a kid, you have bigger emotions than your brain can handle. So you are over emotional. It's part of being a child, part of being an adolescent. So that's why those teenager years are so rough, because you've got all these big emotions, but you haven't got the capacity in your mind, the emotional centers in your brain, to actually manage them. And so this is why your childhood, your upbringing is so crucial and so important. But not in the sense that, well, if you don't, look at me, a fine example. Yeah, I didn't always get that encouragement and taught how to manage emotions, but I actually did as an adult, and I reparented that little girl that lived inside of me, and became the loving, kind parent, but not mollycoddling and not over, controlling. And everything's kind of finding the balance between the two. It's even finding the balance between this and this. Because this is overdeveloped and this is underdeveloped, you find you are empathic, you're not very compassionate, you're very rule-based, rigid rules. No, you've got to do the right thing, and you're kind of top-heavy. That doesn't work. And if you're bottom-heavy, what do we get if we're bottom-heavy? We get over-empathic. We see people as we see them as victims. We become people pleasers, and there's a fly there. We kind of, there's another term which I just have heard about recently. I thought, wow, that's it's called suicidal empathy, where you are so empathic that you will throw yourself under the bus, to help someone else. You'll actually put yourself in danger, maybe stay with a very aggressive person. They need me, because we feel sorry for them, and we feel like, oh no, they can't live without me because this person's extremely needy, but they're also very violent. And I think there's that I'll die rather than, as a parent, I think as a mother, I'd rather die for my kids and put up with terrible a relationship because I need to take care of them or look after them or do what I need to do. Because otherwise, we'll have no money, we'll be homeless. So I think understanding where you're at, when I understood where I was at, I'm overdeveloped here, I'm very intuitive, very feeling. And so I'd react a lot. Thinkers, cognitive, highly heady, will think a lot. And they will get all wrapped up, and we call it analysis paralysis, where they actually can't make a decision. They don't do anything because they're too afraid. It's like, well, they're so, what if? And so there's for and against in both being overdeveloped here or overdeveloped here. And so learning to do the inner child, learning to think through things in a wise way, and that's what I had to learn to do. I had to realize that rationally, logically, if I walked into a room and I felt like no one liked me, well, they didn't even know me. That's not very rational or very logical. But when you're a hearty, that logic and rationale doesn't always come into play because, well, you don't really use this that much. You're more here. And I hope that makes sense for the people that are struggling in one way or another. And for me, it's about, if you're a hearty and you've been deeply wounded, then you've wrapped your heart in a bandage and disconnected from it, well, that doesn't work either. What you're left with, if you're disconnected from your heart. And so the goal or the way forward is always to find that, take responsibility for this, take care of the body, control the mind. And when you learn to do that slowly over time, and it takes years to actually get better, but it's that commitment to knowing thyself more, facing your own inadequacies, weaknesses. I had to own up to the fact that, I hadn't really learned to think things through. And I had to be honest and not run, because I think we don't want to know the truth. This is the shadow work, all that. We don't want to see those things that are wrong with, especially if we feel like we're not good enough anyway. It's really hard to look at that stuff when you already come in on the back foot and feel like crap, to then look at more crap. And so this is about going gentle, going easy, and being kind. And I think it can start with that inner child work. So for me, absolutely, the inner child work can be, not always, it can be really helpful. It can be really powerful because it teaches you to be kind to your own heart. Yeah, all right, you might not like the way you feel. You might not like feeling angry or sad or any of it, but it's your feeling, your responsibility. And when you learn to come through for it in a way that's healing and helpful, and you don't judge it too severely, you tend to learn to manage it. You be the better parent for that kid, and maybe they didn't get that growing up. And so, yes, feelings aren't always fact, but they are your truth. And just because if I say to someone, I feel angry, and someone tries to convince me that I shouldn't or I mustn't or I don't, no, that's my truth. So you can talk to me till you're blue in the face. I know how I feel. I know how I feel. And it might not make sense because feelings don't. They're often very irrational, very illogical. Just look at a kid, like they're melting down all over the place. And they aren't always rational. Look at kids. I'm crying because someone nicked my toy, and it's part of the process of being able to be socialized on the planet. No, be a nice girl, be a good girl, be a good boy. Share your toys. Excuse me. So I hope that makes sense. Anyway, if there's anything else you want me to talk about, I've got quite a few subjects actually that I have been asked about, but I really wanted to talk about this. So please let me know if that makes sense or not. Please let me know if you want to ask a question or want any more information. Anyway, it's lovely to be back in Adelaide. So if you're a client or want to come see me, just sing out, let me know. Okay, bye for now. Oh, and I've been told I must say like and subscribe, and please share this with anyone that you feel maybe a heady, maybe a hearty. Hey, might help someone, who knows. Anyway, okay.